Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our Women in Politics panel. We're really excited to have you all here. My name is Sanisha, and along with Isabella, Ellie, Joelle, and Caitlin, we will be leading today's discussion. This panel grew out of our Community Engaged Learning partnership with the Canadian Federation of University Women, where we've been exploring questions about gender, leadership, and political power. As students of Western University, we wanted to create a space to move these conversations beyond the classroom and into a broader real world discussion by learning directly from women working in politics and law. Unfortunately, one of our speakers had to cancel last minute, but we're very grateful to still be joined by two incredible speakers this evening. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we begin. Please keep yourself on mute during the event to minimize background noise. You're welcome to put your questions in the chat at any time, and we'll make sure to address them during the Q&A at the end. We want to begin with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Attawandaron. We acknowledge all the treaties that are specific to this area. The two-row Wampum Belt Treaty of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Silver Covenant Chain, the beaver hunting grounds of the Haudenosaunee-Nanfan Treaty of 1701, the McKee Treaty of 1790, the London Township Treaty of 1796, the Huron Tract Treaty of 1827, and the Anishinaabeg and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum of the Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous people, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to society. We hold that all that is in the natural world is our highest esteem and give honor to the wonderment of all things within creation. We bring our minds together as one to share good words, thoughts, feelings, and sincerely send them out to each other and to all parts of creation. We are grateful for the natural gifts in our world, and we encourage everyone to be faithful to the natural laws of creation. The three Indigenous nations that are neighbors to London are the Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation, who all continue to live as sovereign nations with individual and unique languages, cultures, and customs. This land acknowledgement is a first step towards reconciliation. Awareness means nothing without action. It is important that everyone takes the necessary steps towards decolonizing practices. We encourage everyone to be informed about the traditional lands, treaties, history, and cultures of the Indigenous people local to their region.
Awesome. And then just a quick note on what CFUW is. So we were connected with the CFUW through our Community Engaged Learning project, which has given us the opportunity to host this panel today. The CFUW is a non-biased, voluntary, self-funded organization with over 6,700 members and 90 clubs across every province in Canada. Since its founding in 1919, the CFUW has worked to improve the status of women and to promote human rights, public education, social justice, and peace. Their mission is to achieve educational and economic equality and social justice through continuous learning and empowerment. And we are so grateful that we had this amazing opportunity to work with them, specifically our contact Linda, and to bring this panel to life today.
Thank you, Caitlin. So I'll start off by introducing each of our speakers before we jump into our questions. I'm very excited to introduce Peggy Sadler, who brings such a strong background in education, research, and public service to everything she does. Peggy holds a Master's of Education from Western University and is also a graduate of McMaster University and Fanshawe College. Before entering provincial politics, she spent 13 years as a trustee on the Thames Valley District School Board, including 2 terms as board chair, and worked as director of policy at a London research firm focused on post-secondary education and workforce development. Since 2000, Peggy has been bringing people together to get real results in the London community. She was first elected as the MPP for London West in 2013 and has since been re-elected in 2014, 2018, 2022, and 2025. She currently serves as the Shadow Minister for Colleges, Universities, Research Excellence and Security, as well as the Chief Opposition Whip at Queen's Park. One of the most powerful parts of Peggy's work is how directly it connects to people's lives. She successfully fought for paid leave for survivors of domestic and sexual violence, which is now a law in Ontario, and she continues to push for paid sick days for every worker. She has also introduced legislation to improve healthcare oversight, combat Islamophobia, protect vulnerable workers, and respond to community safety concerns. Across her career, Peggy has been a strong advocate for accessible healthcare, mental health supports, disability justice, real housing solution, an end to gender-based violence, and meaningful work integrated learning for students. We are incredibly grateful to have her here with us tonight and are so excited to learn from her experiences and insights. Building on that work on the policy level, our next speaker brings a powerful legal and international perspective to these same issues. So I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker, Valerie Oosterveld, who brings such an incredible mix of legal scholarship, international experience, and feminist research to everything she does. She completed her undergraduate degree at the University of Ottawa, her law degree at the University of Toronto, and went on to earn both her LLM and JSD at Columbia University. She is currently a professor at Western Law and the Western Research Chair in International Criminal Justice. Her research focuses on gender and international criminal law, especially how sexual and gender-based crimes are understood and prosecuted by international courts. At the same time, she also worked in some really fascinating emerging areas like space law, including space mining, environmental responsibility in space, and even armed conflict in space through a feminist lens. Professor Oosterveld has been widely recognized for her contributions to scholarship and teaching, including receiving national awards for excellence in law and gender studies. She also co-edited the book Gender in International Criminal Law, which has been internationally recognized for its impact in the field. Beyond academia, her real world impact is absolutely amazing. Before joining Western, she worked in Canada's Department of Foreign Affairs, where she advised on international criminal accountability for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. She served on Canada's delegation to negotiations for the International Criminal Court, including helping negotiate the gender provisions of the Rome Statute itself. She's also currently acting director of the Center for Transitional Justice and Post-Conflict Reconstruction. So we're very honored to have her here with us tonight and excited to learn from her perspective. I will now pass it over to Isabella to begin directing our questions.
Hello. So, Caitlin, I don't know if you can spotlight both of them, but if not, I'll go one by one.
I'm not sure. I think Linda was saying I'm not too sure if that's gonna work,
Okay.
but
That's okay. They're the first ones are just general questions, so we can just spotlight as you speak. So, I'm Isabella. I'll just be doing your first few questions. So before we get into the panel focused questions, what first drew each of you into your public service, whether through law, advocacy, or policy? Was there a moment or an influence that sort of set you on this path or your specializations that you have now? We'll start with Peggy.
Okay, thank you very much for the question, and thank you for organizing this event. I'm very honored to be on the panel with such an accomplished and impactful fellow panelist. So I'll just talk to you a little bit about my political journey. I grew up in the 60s, and my younger brother had an intellectual disability. And so I saw my mother advocate like constantly to get my brother the supports he needed in school. In the 1960s in Ontario, there was no special education. So, my mother had to push tooth and nail to make sure that my brother got the appropriate supports in the classroom. So that kind of taught me a couple of things. One, people treated my brother differently than they treated my sister and I. And that to me, that I felt that profoundly, that my brother's opportunities in life were going to be different than for my sister and I. And it also taught me the importance of advocacy and the role of government in making sure that there is fairness and opportunity for people like my brother. Then when I sort of became of voting age and was interested in sort of, what was happening politically around me, this was in the 1980s, and there were two major things happening at the time. One was the fight against apartheid in South Africa, and I became like really mobilized by that issue and engaged in the anti-apartheid advocacy. And it worked, that we got the government of Canada to join the boycott of South Africa, which felt like a real victory. And again, it was, it showed the power of advocacy and mobilizing people, working with policymakers to get an important change. And then the other issue in the 1980s that was very influential for me was abortion, because abortion was criminalized in the criminal code, and there was, with the Morgentaler Clinic, there was a big push to get abortion decriminalized. And again, that was something that was very important to me. I got involved with the Canadian Abortion Rights Action League and really pushed for that. And once again, advocacy worked. The change was made, and so that was very important for so many women in Canada. So these kinds of experiences made me feel very strongly about being engaged in public policy and recognizing the power of politics and getting politicians who understand what the real issues are and who support, the changes that need to be made, how important that is. And so that was kind of how I became, really interested and engaged in politics.
Yeah, wow. I think it really is also like a testament to when you're passionate about something or like a certain issue, like you can really push for it and you can really advocate. And I know like a lot of women on the call who want to go into politics have things that they're passionate about. So it is, something that we should all push to advocate for. And I'd love to hear from Valerie as well, because I know there's a lot of women aspiring to be lawyers.
Sure, absolutely. And a lot of what Peggy has said, actually, I will reiterate because I was influenced by my parents who were very active in their community. I grew up in Thunder Bay in Northern Ontario, and my dad in particular was very active in the community, and I always saw that. So there's something to be said by seeing and then doing, even within your own family. So that was an influence when I was younger. Then when I went off to University of Ottawa, in my undergraduate years, I was very active in Amnesty International because I was very interested in international human rights, including international women's human rights. When I was in my third year of university and getting ready to go off to law school, the killings in Montreal at the École Polytechnique happened of the women engineering students. And that was absolutely shocking, unnerving for a female university student at the time, understanding that it happened to them in Montreal, yes, but it could happen anywhere in Canada. So international human rights and women's human rights weren't just out there, in other countries around the world. It was an issue in Canada at that moment in time, and it galvanized me. I went off to law school, focused on international women's human rights while I was there with the Women's Action Network of Amnesty International and taking every course that I possibly could. And I think one of the most valuable experiences for me in law school was being mentored by a professor in international women's human rights who showed me that you can combine academic pursuits and real world impact in changing laws on the ground. That just being able to study with her and under her, and being her research assistant, and then later continuing to be mentored by her, was probably the most amazing step in my life in terms of getting me on the path to where I am today. Then I wanted to mention that that kind of continued after I graduated. So yes, I went into the private practice of law because you need to do a year of articling in order to be called to the bar. And then I worked for 2 more years at a law firm. But I was still volunteering on the side in women's human rights. And in particular, at this moment in time, the International Criminal Tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda had been created. And I was part of a group tracking to ensure that what happened at those tribunals was gender sensitive. Because unfortunately, the beginnings of those tribunals were very gender insensitive. They were overlooking all kinds of gender-based crimes, only focusing on certain crimes that the investigators felt were more worthy of being investigated. So we were calling them out, submitting amicus curiae briefs, friends of the court briefs to point out to the court this overlooking of gender-based crimes. And that kind of kickstarted everything that happened after that, which I can get into in more detail later. But that's kind of the beginning that you were asking about.
Okay, yeah, I think it's interesting that both of you became sort of interested in something on an international level, which shows that a lot of times when you go into a professional field, like there's so much you can do from like our home in Canada that can be seen overseas and that you can contribute to on an international sphere, which I think is really like inspiring for a lot of women who want to do international relations or even just politics here, but want to make a broader impact. I'm going to shift into sort of a more panel focused, like women in politics question or law question. So, according to LinkedIn, only 30.6% of leadership positions globally are held by women. It's an increase of only 0.2% since 2022. In many sectors, progress has slowed or even reversed, and leadership gaps persist even in industries where women make up majority of the workers. So, what do you think explains the stagnation in women's leadership across sectors, including fields where women dominate? And in your own professions, to what extent do you feel sort of informal cultures, such as the old boys network or like male-centric professional norms that continue to influence or advance leadership roles? Or I know all of you, or the both of you, have worked with a lot of women just through your fields, if you've seen it through anyone you've worked with. We'll start with Peggy. Yeah, if you want to start.
Well, I feel very fortunate right now. I'm in a political caucus that is 2/3 women, which is very rare. And in fact, I think it was in the 2014 in 2014 caucus, I think that was the first time that the NDP was 50% women. So we've always, because of structures within the party, which I'll talk about with a later question, the NDP has always had a lot of success in identifying opportunities for women to run in winnable seats and then supporting women to be elected. But certainly in the halls of the legislature, in the halls of parliament, you do see a lot of the the old boys style of doing politics, and there are not very many caucuses like mine, like the Ontario NDP caucus, where we have 2/3 women. But interestingly, I met with the Ontario Principals Council today. So there were three women principals who were talking about some of the issues facing principals right now in our public education system. And we started talking about who takes on these leadership roles of principal and what are some of the barriers for to step into those roles. And they did comment that the reality remains very much that it is that men, even though men are underrepresented in the teaching profession across the board, they are overrepresented among school administrators, particularly at the secondary level. And it seems to be like she was saying that out of two out of a school of teachers, a group of teachers who go on to become administrators. Maybe there'll be two women who move on, two men who move on, but the women are moving from, there's a much greater proportion of women who are teachers for those two who move into leadership roles versus men. But I think that a lot of times, you know, you put yourself out there in a leadership role, and it can be, you know, it can be a very, you can feel very vulnerable in that kind of position, particularly today in political leadership. You know, there's just so much toxicity that is directed at politicians, and I think women politicians in particular. And with the school administrators that I was talking to, they said, you know, kind of a similar thing, that you know, people don't want to move into administration because you are, you know, you're taking on all of this, you know, dealing with families and some very difficult, challenging issues, and you know, you have to, you're putting yourself out, and so I think there's a lot of times where women are, you know, comfortable doing the work that they're doing, and maybe less feel that it's too big of a risk to step into that public leadership role because of the, you know, the environment in which they are leading is it can be a very threatening and uncomfortable place.
Yeah, I do feel exactly what you're saying in the like education sector. I feel all my principals growing up were male, but I really only had one male teacher
Yeah.
other than like it was all female teachers. So even like subconsciously, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, you know, all of our leadership in the school itself is male, but like women do have the ability to do that or can aspire to do that. And even though it might be intimidating because you're typically going against these men for principal or leadership, like that is something possible. So I think that's a really good note. I'd love to hear from Valerie as well.
If I just wanted to add one more thing though. In politics, like there's research that shows this, the number of times a woman has to be asked to run before she will agree to put her name on a ballot. So it's like, you know, 7+ times typically. And with male candidates who end up on a ballot, the research shows the first time they're asked, it's like, what took you so long to ask me? Yeah, of course I'm going to run. And so there's different, you know, there's differences in how people get into these leadership positions as well, due to some of these circumstances that I was talking about. Sorry to interrupt, Valerie.
Oh gosh, not at all, because it's all quite applicable also in the legal field. So let me talk a little bit about what it looked like when I first entered the legal field, and I'll talk about what things look like right now. So when I came into university, University of Toronto Law School, our class was about 50-50, male and female, but our professors were mostly male and there were fewer female. When I went into the practice of in a private law firm right away out of law school, again, the partners, the vast majority were male. Yes, there were more women coming up through the junior ranks, but it was still a majority of men. And it was fascinating because the women would talk to us and give us little warnings about what, you know, the pitfalls, the barriers, and that sort of thing. Then when I went into government, it was fascinating because it was 50-50 and it was very equal in the legal bureau at Foreign Affairs, Department of Foreign Affairs. It was kind of a revelation. It was a really, really wonderful and supportive place to work. Everyone was, oh, I had my first baby when I was there. Oh, of course you're going to have a family. Oh, and you need to have some time. Obviously, we're all working very hard because when you work in the field of international law, things are happening every day around the world, and the minister needs to have direction on what the legal issues or the legal answers are for particular things. But at the same time, there's also a balance between your personal life, your family life, and your work life. And then I went into academia and I was quite shocked for two reasons. First of all, there were very few women. And I came in 2005 at the Faculty of Law, and you could count just a handful of women, and we're still not at 50% today. So you can see the long-lasting impacts of female exclusion from law even now. Let me talk about international law because the same thing tends to happen. I work in the field of gender issues in international criminal law. International criminal law is a relatively new area of law, having kind of the most recent iteration of it starting in 1993. So it's a relatively new, very fast developing area of law. And because of that, it was relatively egalitarian in terms of who was able to kind of enter and be a part of that. And there is, I haven't counted, but there is relative gender parity from what I see and from the staffing, the general staffing at international courts, for example. But then when you start to look at the places that young women and older women working in the might aim for, the exclusions are so significant, except in one example that I'm going to give in a moment. So let's look at the International Court of Justice. So say you're dreaming, where might I go someday? Maybe be a judge on the International Court of Justice. 5.2% of all judges that have ever sat on that court in its 80-year history have been female. That is absolutely shocking, but it goes to the old boys network in terms of who gets chosen to be a candidate at the International Court of Justice. And then let me make one other point in that regard. Many of the people who are judge candidates for the International Court of Justice served on something called the International Law Commission, which is part of the United Nations. It's where independent experts from around the world get elected to this body, and they serve on the International Law Commission to help identify new treaties that are needed, for example, new developing areas of law. That body is very male heavy also. It's in its history about almost 12% of the people on the International Law Commission in its 70 plus year history have been female. So once you get a bottleneck happening in a place that is then a feeder to another body like the International Law Commission to the International Court of Justice, you have this incredible exclusion of women because they are not part of the old boys network that, when countries are deciding who they're going to nominate, they're not part of those networks. So that's rather frustrating. And then I'll make one more point. Generally speaking, depending on what all the members of the audience are thinking and dreaming of, what might ultimately be your goal, there's never been a female Secretary General of the United Nations either. There's a campaign right now because Antonio Guterres is being replaced. His term will be done in December, and they need to figure out. I think maybe it's next December. I can't remember exactly, but soon. And the United Nations General Assembly needs to figure out who's going to replace him. And there's a campaign, elect a female. This next Secretary General should be female. But the amount of pushback and the same tired arguments that get made, well, we need to focus on merit. And it's like, as if we haven't been focusing on merit. All the women who are in the high levels of the United Nations generally needed to be 10 times as good as the guy next door. So how is it that we're talking about, well, we need to focus on merit? And it's the same argument that gets trotted out again and again and again. That's so frustrating because that is not the issue.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of times when gender gaps in positions are brought up, they're always like in the past of, they used to be like this, but we are really fixing things and things are so much better now. But it really is evident, even through everything you were saying, that it is still very prominent today, even current day. And there's still a lot that needs to be done. And there's still these old cliche networks that are happening, and it's not completely in the past, which I think sometimes we lose sight of. And we think we've made all this progress when there's still a lot to go. Just my last general question for you. You're both so established in your fields now, but for many young women who are on the call or in general who are just entering politics or law, the environment can feel very intimidating. So, how did you build your confidence in these spaces, even working among people who maybe had their biases against you?
Do you want me to start again? Okay.
Sure.
So one of my challenges as a someone in public life is that I'm an introvert. And so that has been something that I have really had to work hard at managing. But what happened, I joined a campus NDP club at McMaster when I was a student there. And there was a by-election that year, and there was like this unbelievable candidate for the by-election. Valerie, you may know Marion Dewar. So Marion Dewar, former mayor of Ottawa, had come to Hamilton to run in this by-election. And she came to speak to our NDP club, and I had never been involved in a campaign before. But I was so inspired by Marion Dewar that I wanted to go and help get her elected. So I showed up at the campaign office, and I said I would like to stuff envelopes or like stamps or bundle leaflets or something that didn't require talking to anyone. And then Marion, I think the first day I was there, she came in, she put her arm around me and she said, "Oh, it's so nice to have you here. And would you like to go canvassing with me one day?" So I went out with Marion and then, stood with her at the doors. And then I don't know, it didn't take very long before they said, "Well, why don't you just, you're such a good canvasser. We need you to go out on your own." So then I ended up canvassing on my own. And then I became a full-time canvasser, and I discovered that I really liked interacting with voters at the doorstep, talking to people about what their challenges were and what their hopes were, what they wanted to see from their government. So that was very formative for me. The recognition that I could be in public life, I could engage with people like that on political issues. And then Marion was elected. I got the opportunity to work for her on Parliament Hill as a staffer. And that was just a really incredible experience. Valerie, you talked about December 6th. And that happened that year that I was working for Marion Dewar on Parliament Hill, and I can still remember that, waking up and hearing that news and how that felt. But then after I had worked for Marion, there was an election in Ontario in 1990, and the NDP formed government. And again, I had worked in that election for a woman candidate. Her name is Marilyn Shirley, and she was elected and appointed to cabinet. And then I had an opportunity to go work in her office she was a cabinet minister, and I was able to work in her office. And Marilyn Shirley was also really inspiring to me and very, very supportive. And so I had incredible opportunities through Marilyn Shirley. So I have benefited just hugely from these experiences with these women that I admired so much, who were engaged politically. And when I first decided to run for school board trustee, in 2000. I waited until the last hour of the last day of the nomination period to go down to City Hall to put my name on a ballot, because it just felt like, whoa, that I felt like I was falling off a cliff to take that huge step of putting my name on a ballot for the first time. But I called Marion Dewar and told her she was, there's no bigger supporter of mine than Marion Dewar was. And at that time, I lived in London, and the former MPP for London North Centre, Marion Boyd, I had become involved with Marion Boyd and the NDP Riding Association in London. And Marion Boyd also was very helpful to me when I was running for trustee. And when I told her that I had put my name on a ballot, she was the first person to pull out her checkbook and write me a check for my trustee campaign. And I know that you have a question later on about finances, but Marion Boyd demonstrating that confidence in my ability to serve as a local school board trustee by writing me a check was really, like, it was very, very important to me, and I would say my political career. So these women mentors I've had have been just amazing.
I will repeat Peggy as well again, because one of the most important things that you can do is to seek out and find a mentor who is doing what you would like to do, or you think you might want to do, or they can guide you in some other way. But having a mentor or mentors can be really, really helpful, especially if you are doing something for the first time. Like I mentioned before, I was the first ever in my family to go to law school. Peggy, I think you were probably the first to go into politics, perhaps. Yeah.
Definitely.
So, apologies, I'm just recovering from a cold. So having a mentor or mentors can be incredibly helpful. If you can surround yourself by people who are supportive of you, that can be very helpful as well. If you are able to get out and do the thing that you want to do as an intern, that is also really, really helpful. That's how I got in to international law, or at least got glimpses into what the practice of international law really is, and made contacts and understood how things are within the United Nations system with non-governmental organizations, how things really work. I did 2 internships. And then, yeah, actually, I think that that's basically covers it. You mentorship, internships, or experience in what you want to do at the kind of a beginning level that can also affirm whether or not you really do want to do that thing, but it can also help you make contacts and surrounding yourself by people who believe in you. All very helpful.
Yeah, I think like even like a lot of people I've spoken to personally always say find a mentor, find someone who's doing it. It can be intimidating. I know for like a lot of university students, like you don't know if you really want to do something, if you should bother them, but I think both of you sort of made the testament that we should just go out and find a mentor. I want to thank you for answering those few general questions. I'm gonna hand it off to Caitlin, and she's gonna get into some more direct questions for each of you.
Hi, it's lovely to meet you. I just have some questions tailored a little bit more to the political field, so I'll be asking Peggy, and then we're going to pass the questions over to Joelle, who will ask some more questions based more so on the legal field. And so my first question for you, Peggy, is just, according to some testimonies from the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women, Canadian researchers have found that the sacrificial lamb hypothesis still holds. And this just means that women are often placed in ridings where their party has little chance or no chance of winning. And so the committee also heard that only a very small number of women are given truly winnable ridings. From your experience inside party structures, how real are these issues and how do we hold parties accountable?
Well, the NDP, both provincially and federally, well, certainly the Ontario NDP, I can't speak for every single provincial section, but the Ontario NDP, the federal NDP have strict requirements for before nomination meetings can take place. So a riding association, before they can get approval for a candidate to be nominated, they have to show and document that they have conducted an exhaustive search with a focus on equity deserving candidates. So that's the reason why two-thirds of our caucus right now in Ontario are women, because we were all nominated in ridings that, well, London West wasn't initially viewed as winnable. The first time that I won it, we had to work really hard. But we were all nominated in ridings that we were not sacrificial lambs. There was an opportunity. If it was a strong campaign, it was a real opportunity to be elected. So putting party structures like that in place, like requirements for the candidate search process as candidates are identified, has been key to the NDP's success in electing women candidates. I don't think the other parties have similar requirements in place. I know some parties use the appointment of candidates to try to get a better balance or more reflective group of candidates. But certainly the constitutional requirements within the NDP's constitution for these nominations has been really pivotal.
Yeah, well, it's amazing to hear that the NDP does have requirements and things in place to ensure that women have a fair shot at getting winnable ridings, and that they're looking at experience and talent rather than just putting men first. So that's amazing to hear. The second question I have for you is, the World Economic Forum reports that economic barriers are one of the strongest predictors of whether women can enter politics. Women consistently have smaller donor networks, less access in high-income circles, and face greater volatility in private fundraising. UN Women similarly finds that financial inequality remains one of the biggest structural obstacles for women candidates. The financial side of politics is often overlooked. And how do disparities in fundraising networks or lack of private donor support affect women's campaigns compared to men's?
Well, I think there's a lot of men who come to politics from business backgrounds, and they have extensive kind of business networks, and there's a lot of money to be had there from donors. But what I have seen with women entering politics, most women come to politics because they have identified a problem and they want to fix it. And they usually work with like a community collaborative, like they pull people together to come up with a solution and make the change that they want to see. And so while the donations may be smaller, this is a very effective way for women to grow their networks and be able to draw on those, the people that they've been working with to address a common problem in a neighborhood. They can draw on those networks and generate fundraising that way. So, you're not going to get as many of those big dollar donations as male candidates get, but you do have this network of people who support you, who've seen you, who know you, who believe in you, who are willing to write checks. I have to say that as somebody who's been reelected now, actually, if you count my school board elections, I think it's 9 elections in a row. But once, like, there's a barrier to get women on the ballot. I talked about that earlier, to get women to agree to step forward to be a candidate. But once the electorate has a woman candidate to vote for, and it is it's a winnable riding, people will vote for women candidates, and they will support women candidates. In the last election, I don't know if everybody remembers those $200 checks that we got from the premier in January, the rebate checks. I had so many people coming to the campaign office to make $200 donations to my campaign. So it's once you have women as candidates for people to hear from and consider supporting, people will provide that financial support. That's what I have found.
That's good to hear, especially too, because I think that the financial side of politics could often be a deterrent for women getting involved. So it's nice to hear that kind of like once you're on the ballot, it's easier than, or not, I don't know if it's the easier, but it's not as, sorry, it's easier to get the donations and to interact with everybody than it seems to, than it is believed. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. I'm like fumbling my words here. I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to pass it over to Joelle. So many women describe the political environment as combative or exclusionary. What kinds of institutional or cultural changes could be made so that political spaces are inclusive rather than simply diverse?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't enjoy heckling. There's a lot of heckling that goes on that it can be really mean and just nasty and sometimes there'll be a clever heckle that I don't mind, but many times the heckling gets really personal, and it just makes me tune out. So I know that some legislatures, like in Quebec, the National Assembly has made a blanket prohibition, no heckling, like no talking at all during question period or any time, I guess, the legislature's in session. So I don't know if that is the way, if that is an option that I would support, but certainly I like having a strong speaker in the legislature who's going to really work on the decorum and managing the heckling would be really important, because I know there are a lot of, in particular, women. I'm sure there's some male politicians as well who don't enjoy it, but for a lot of women, it feels very it just makes me want to disengage. I don't enjoy that combativeness. I don't enjoy the mudslinging, the throwing, getting down into the dirt and hurling insults across the aisle. I think it demeans political debate and the reasons why we have been elected to serve, like why we are there. We're supposed to be debating important policy issues, not insulting each other. So there's a lot of work that has to be done in those political spaces to try to tone that down. Yeah, Linda Davis says, do you think the heckling and bullying environment might be the reason more people don't get into politics? Absolutely. Absolutely. And especially if the only thing you see of Queen's Park or Parliament Hill, if the only thing you see is question period, that's when the heckling and the bullying and the insults tend to get really ramped up. Yeah, there's a lot of women who say, like, why would I want to get into that? Like, it's very off-putting.
Yeah, no, that's completely understandable. Do you have any ideas or anything about how we could, or how it would be implemented so that heckling wasn't allowed? Or do you think that's just going to kind of be a predominant part of politics for the next while?
Well, as I said, the Quebec National Assembly just made that part of their standing order that there's no, heckling. I think they're like talking isn't allowed. So there's no, it's silent in, I believe, in the assembly, except for the person who holds the floor, who is speaking at the time. But as the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly can have a very important role and that is one of the functions of the Speaker is to maintain decorum in the chamber. So a Speaker can really set the tone for how the what kinds of exchanges we're going to have in the chamber, and so that is that electing, maybe we need to elect more women as speakers. We just in Ontario elected the first speaker of the Legislative Assembly, in well over 100 years, like since Confederation, we've finally got a woman speaker. I would say that it hasn't affected decorum at all, but the role of speaker is an important one to try to manage that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you so much for answering my questions. They were very insightful, and we all really appreciate it. And I'm going to pass over the microphone to Joelle, and she can ask Professor Oosterwolde her questions.
Hey, hi guys. So I have a few questions for you, Professor. They're going to be more law focused for those of us interested for that side. So to start off, you mentioned the value of mentorship a lot. Well, both of you mentioned it, but throughout law school, um, that helped you a lot with you choosing your career. Um, so throughout your own career, you also mentored women entering law school and international justice. So what do you see as the most important support or guidance women need today to succeed in fields that were once exclusively male?
That's a really good question. And let me give you an example of how I have worked with my law school to try to directly address this issue. So when I joined Western Law in 2005, I thankfully at the time had a very supportive dean who was interested in setting up an internship program. So I mentioned earlier how impactful the two internships that I did shortly after law school were in terms of opening up avenues for my career, helping me to understand what the practice of international law might be like, making contacts. And these were facilitated by my mentor at University of Toronto Law School, Professor Rebecca Cook. So given her impact on me, on my career, in helping to facilitate those internships, I wanted to help set up an internship program for Western law students in order to be able to do the same to pay it back by helping those students with their internship placements. So I can't remember how it was quite tiny in that first year, maybe 5 students or something like that. But we've grown over the years and it still exists. So from 2005 to 2025, so it's 20 years old now. And we have sent over 200 at least students on internships around the world. Many of them are female law students who have gone to intern for the summer with everything from the Ontario Bar Association to the World Bank to the World Health Organization to the Women's Initiatives for Gender Justice in The Hague, which is a very well-respected non-governmental organization, to Canadian embassies abroad and whatnot. That is a very specific type of example of a structural change that I strongly believe in and have helped to make for students at Western Law. But if you're not at Western Law, look around and try and find something like that. We're not the only place in Canada that has internship programs. There are many different law schools and other faculties that have internship programs, and try and take advantage of that. That that I think is a very practical answer to your question.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I know myself, I'm really struggling right now with finding internships and figuring out where I want to apply and all that. And I think approaching it through a mentor that can give you advice is a really good way to do that, so you don't get lost with all the thousands of internships that there are.
Oh, Joelle, can I mention one more thing? So even for people who are not here at Western Law, we have created a booklet of internships that we update every year that now, of course, it is law focused because we are at a law school, but of internships that have a law focus that students can apply to, and they don't have to be at Western Law, of course. So if anyone in the audience is interested in receiving that booklet, please just shoot me an email. I'll send it off to you. It doesn't solve your problem of having 100 internships to look through, but what it does is it helps to give you information in one spot that perhaps you might be gathering yourself by going to this website and that website and that website. It's that kind of opening of doors, even if it's just informational doors, that I find to be very helpful for women who are trying to make their way into the career that they want to make. Because sometimes you're standing outside the gates and you have no idea how to get in. So even just looking through an internship booklet that actually has at the very beginning some advice on how to get into the practice of international law, that can be a good step forward as well.
That's awesome. I feel like I'm definitely going to send you an email and ask for that. Okay, next, between 1991 and 2001, female law graduates in Canada grew by 73%, yet leadership in law and international justice remains male-dominated. From your experience, what hidden barriers still hold women back? I know you talked about the Old Boys Club, but do you have any more examples? And what
Mhm.
needs to change for the next generation to truly lead?
So let me start by mentioning one of the barriers, which is many of the women who enter law are first time, first generation coming in to the legal practice. So they don't have the benefit of having had their father, many of them don't have the benefit of having their father, for example, or mother, or aunt or uncle or something like that, who has practiced law and can kind of decode the language and the pathways for them. And that can be a barrier. So I had mentioned before those who might dream of getting into the International Court of Justice or the International Law Commission, the path is quite full of barriers for women. And that's one of them because there are people out there who actually, because of information passed to them, know exactly how to navigate up to whatever it might be. It might be a partner at a law firm, it might be leader in a particular organization or whatnot, because of this passed down information. Whereas there are many women who are first generation who are just trying to figure the whole thing out and don't have that benefit. But that's where a mentor can really help. Help open those doors or at least help explain pathways. In terms of other barriers to law, there are significant financial barriers to law. This applies, of course, to everybody, but law school is now very expensive, and that has an impact. It has an impact in some particular ways. Let me just mention one, which is the types of jobs that people can get directly out of law school pay differently depending on what they are. So going into the public sector, which is actually where quite a few women coming into law school would like to end up. Many of them end up going into the private sector, which is still very good, obviously, because we need more women in the private sector as well, but they do it not necessarily because it's their overwhelming first choice, but because practically speaking, they need to start paying off debts that they took on in order to go to law school. That's understandable. And so I meet with many of these students and we talk through, okay, so what's your plan if you really do want to end up in the public sector or in international law practice? Absolutely go into the private sector in the beginning and then figure your way out through. Many people going into international law will work at any rate for 2, 3 years in the private sector because they want to get domestic experience before they make the switch to working into international law. That's absolutely a great way to go. If you need to go into the private sector in order to pay off your debts, absolutely. But you just need to think of your plan. What is your plan after that? What do you want to do? What kinds of places can you volunteer at, or legal opportunities can you take in your private sector job that can help you gain the type of experience you want to make the jump into your international law or public sector job as well. So that the not having that plan can be a barrier to ending up where you want to be as well. And then it then reduces the number of women who end up in, for example, public international law positions.
Okay, great. What key findings or insights about gender or international justice have emerged from your research and that you think are most important for us to understand today?
The one that I would point to, or the kind of collection that I would point to the most, is that one of the areas that I feel most passionate about is what and I call this because of another mentor that I had, the surfacing of gender-based crimes. So in my field of international criminal law, which in case anyone doesn't know what this field is, it has to do with the prosecution of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. So really, really serious international crimes. For thousands of years, hundreds of years, gender-based crime in war was not considered a crime. Like sexual violence in war, for example, was not considered a crime. And in fact, it was considered a prize of war in the Middle Ages. So then what has been fascinating is after World War II, and particularly after the creation of the International Criminal Tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda by the United Nations Security Council in the mid-1990s, we have seen the rapid development and of recognition of gender-based crimes as crimes in international law, and that people can be held personally accountable for those crimes in the Yugoslav Tribunal, Rwanda Tribunal, International Criminal Court, and other international tribunals as well. So that's a long kind of introduction to say then what I've been doing in that field is working to surface particular crimes. One crime is called forced marriage. So this is where oftentimes during an armed conflict, an armed group will abduct women and girls, and it's mostly girls, to be honest, and then they will forcibly assign them to be so-called wives. And I always put that in air quotes because they're not actually wives, but they're called wives, and then they're forced to have sex whenever their so-called husband, the fighter, the soldier wants to do that. And they are usually also domestic slaves, basically cooking, cleaning for this person. And if they happen to get pregnant, they have to bear and rear the children that result. So this is called forced marriage in international law. And the term doesn't come from me. It comes from the women of Sierra Leone, who were the subject of a decade-long, very brutal armed conflict. And there was a court that I was involved in creating in the country of Sierra Leone at the end of its conflict when I was at Global Affairs Canada, at Foreign Affairs Canada. And the prosecutor at that court went to the women who suffered. They had been abducted and forced to be what was called a bushwife at the time. And he said, I want to prosecute what happened to you. What should I call it? And they said, you need to call it forced marriage. So he said, okay, I will. He went to the court. He faced some roadblocks. His charges were dismissed at first, but in a second trial, they were accepted and there were actually convictions entered. So then part of that required kind of an unpacking in law. What is this crime? What does it contain? What does a prosecutor have to prove? So that's what I've been working on. And then it was adopted at the International Criminal Court in a trial called Ongwen involving crimes in northern Uganda in 2022, if I remember correctly. Yes, it was 2022. So I'm involved in kind of servicing the legal aspects of these crimes, but of course the naming of that crime came from the women, the victims themselves. And I work on other crimes as well, sexual slavery, forced pregnancy, and others. So,
Oh, that's really cool. Okay. Gonna ask one more question for you. Looking ahead 10 to 15 years, where do you anticipate the most significant advances or setbacks in the development of gender-inclusive international criminal law?
That's a tricky question to ask because we're at a very tricky moment in time. So I've spent all of my career pressing for deeper and deeper understandings of gender-based violence in war, and have been very pleased and proud of how far we've come in a relatively short period of time. I know it's a longer period of time than many of you have even been alive, but from 1993 until today. But we're at a time of very strong backlash on gender-based violence, recognition of gender-based violence, addressing gender-based violence. And I'm not totally sure where that's going to end up in the short term, in the next 4 years or so, 3, 4 years or so. Because in the United Nations system right now, if any of you have ever been to the UN Commission on the Status of Women, the Canadian Federation of University Women often sends a delegation to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. But the rhetoric coming from those who are opposed to gender rights and women's rights is shocking. It's at an all-time high, I think. So this is why it's a challenging time right now. But I am hopeful that we can overcome this bump in the road at this moment in time and emerge still on a progressive sort of steps forward in international law, in recognition of women's human rights and gender-related human rights, simply because the momentum of the past, I think, will carry us forward.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it off to Zanisha. Thank you so much for answering those questions. And I think she's going to open up the general chats that you guys have been sending throughout this whole panel, and we're going to address some of those.
Great, thank you so much, Joelle. So, if we can start with this one question in the chat, what advice would you give to young women who feel pressured to be perfect before speaking up, applying for opportunities, or stepping into leadership? So, Professor, if you would like to go first.
Sure. I know that this is hard because there is that pressure to be perfect before speaking up. And I see it in my classes all the time, where the guys don't feel any hesitancy to speak up. They'll speak before they form their thoughts. And the women will hold back and only speak once their thoughts are fully formed and they feel comfortable with what they're going to say. So perhaps the advice is not necessarily directly to the young woman, this first bit of advice. It's actually to the people who are in the classrooms, in the workplaces where these young women are. encourage them, and create the type of classroom or workplace where they feel comfortable and they feel safe to speak up. It's where the young women don't feel unsafe, and I don't mean necessarily like physically unsafe, but sometimes just putting out a new idea, um, trying out a new thought process can feel unsafe because it hasn't been tested before. But then my thought would be, so if so that's what I try and do, is create a space where everyone feels that they can do that. And then I would also encourage the young women to try and put the pressures they put on themselves aside and then just kind of go for it if they can.
Yeah, I completely agree. There are so many times, even with myself, where I'm second guessing what I'm going to say and scared that my opinion won't be the correct opinion, even though there really isn't a correct opinion. But it is a scary thing. Peggy, do you have anything to add to this?
Um, it's hard, but you like believe in yourself and be kind to yourself. Like that's the thing that I have that I always remind myself of being someone in public life and also an introvert. But there have been times where I've had to, speak extemporaneously at a public event, and I'm not prepared, and it's my heart is pounding as I go up to the mic, and then I give the remarks, and then afterwards I'm thinking, oh, I should have said this, I should have done this, I should have, should have. But instead, like it's easy just to want to, crawl under a rock and not put yourself out again, but you just have to dust yourself off and go out there and keep doing it. And then the surprising thing for me is that some of these events where, this has happened to me and I feel like, oh, I just did such a bad job. I get really positive feedback. So I think that sometimes we are our harshest critics. And so we shouldn't do that to ourselves. We should you have to believe in yourself, and you have to just cut yourself some slack, and don't beat yourself up if you haven't expressed yourself as perfectly as you would have liked to.
That is so great to hear. And I would just like to say that I personally think you both are amazing speakers. So it's just so great to hear you speak and share your insights. Now, this is for Peggy specifically. How do you personally deal with online harassment and public criticism as a woman in politics, especially with how aggressive social media has become?
Yeah, I'm really having a thing with social media. I'm just delegating more and more to my staff. So I will approve our posts, but my staff have control over my social media accounts, so they do the posts, they read the comments. I'm not exposing myself to those comments because it certainly does me no good. And the so many of the people who comment are not using real names, and they're just doing it to stir up controversy or whatever. So I know leader Marit Stiles, the Ontario NDP leader. She also will not read any of the comments on social media. Like it's a very unhealthy thing for a female politician to do, to look at those comments on social media. So you have to, like, it's a protective measure to not go through all of that cesspool on social media. But it's something that I think many of my fellow women politicians have started doing, because it's just so awful, and it doesn't make you feel good, and it's so it's so unrelated to the work that I'm doing. Like there's real issues that people are dealing with in London West, and I'm working with constituents who are desperate for some support from government, and the kinds of posts and comments that people make on social media don't have anything to do with the policy and legislative changes that I'm trying to make a difference for people in the community.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. A lot of the time, things that are said on social media don't really do anything good for you, for your mental health, and for any of the work that you're doing. And it's so much better to have someone else look at those things just so you can stay on track with the work that you're doing to help your community.
Yeah.
Um, so now for Professor, there are a few questions. So the first one, regarding gender-based violence. So in Canada, do you think intimate partner violence and or gender-based violence could be considered a hate crime? And should this be better defined in the law?
Thanks so much. Thank you, Linda, for the question. Then I'm going to dodge the question. I do apologize just because I am not a domestic law specialist, although I do work with closely with those who work on domestic intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. But let me, if you don't mind, then make the jump to international criminal law. And this actually answers another question, which is Darian's question. In international criminal law, what's one gender-based injustice that still doesn't get enough global attention? So I'm going to answer two questions in one by saying that the answer to both, if you're looking at international criminal law, sorry, is a crime against humanity called gender persecution or gender-based persecution. So this is the gender-based injustice that doesn't get enough global attention, but it's also the place in which, or the category under which gender-based violence could be considered a type of hate crime, or intimate partner violence doesn't come as much into international criminal law because it has to be connected with armed conflict and whatnot. But gender-based violence could be considered a hate crime under gender persecution. So what do I mean by this? Persecution on gender grounds is something that happens in many places. It's happening right now in Afghanistan, for example. An entire population of women and girls is being persecuted simply because they are women and girls. And it's simply because of the socially constructed ideas of what female means that the Taliban holds and is imposing on those women and girls. And not enough attention is being paid to kind of this type of persecution, which has so many aspects to it. Thinking about life in Afghanistan right now, you have the exclusion of women and girls from education, from the workplace, but also from places where they normally would be in the past, like beauty salons or gyms or parks, outdoor parks. And now they're not even allowed to speak or sing in places outdoors. And they also can't travel very easily. So all of every type of human right is being impacted in this way. And when that happens, that is a form of gender persecution. So that is what I think should get more global attention, but also the way in which we can get gender-based violence considered kind of as a hate type of crime at international criminal law.
Definitely. And it's so scary to hear about all these different things that happen in other parts of the world, especially since I feel like a lot of the time we're sheltered and we don't really have a full view of what's going on. So it's so great to hear that. And then the final question for tonight would be for you, Professor. What do you think helps make your resume or CV stand out when applying for law schools other than a good score on the LSATs?
Well, if you can be unique in some way, that is very helpful. And just think about your background. there is something in there that is unique, that's not the same as every other applicant to law school. It could be a hobby that you've done, it could be a volunteer role that you've played, it could be a job that you've held, it could be a situation you've had to deal with in your job or your volunteer work or at university. Um, Somehow, if you can get in there that unique aspect of you. So let me give you a couple of examples that stood out for me over the years. There was one student that I was, this wasn't to get into law school, but it was to get an internship right after first year of law school. And she wrote about how she had joined the equestrian club at Western. And I didn't even know that Western University had an equestrian club. But B, she talked about how she came from just a regular background. She'd always dreamed of riding a horse. She had saved up her money. She had done every odd job under under the universe. She had bought this horse. And then when she came to university, it came to law school, she brought this horse with her, and how hard it was to do that. But this horse is part of her family now, basically. So this was quite fascinating to see this little glimpse into how hard this one person worked in a unique way, and it jumped out and helped her to get from the maybe pile into the let's interview you pile. Let's just hear more about what you've done. And then others have talked about challenges that they've overcome in their life, or they've talked about really interesting projects that they've done or businesses that they started up. I'm always so amazed at these unique bits of stories that come out. So that's the advice that I would give in trying to make yourself stand out, is to draw on your uniqueness. At the same time, of course, you're going to stress all the other things that will get you into law school, your coursework, your LSAT scores and that sort of thing.
That's so great to hear. I know I'll definitely take that into consideration as well for applying for law schools. I would like to now pass it on to Ellie to conclude our panel for this evening.
Hi again. So just before we sign off, I just wanted to say on behalf of all of us that we can't thank our speakers, Peggy and Valerie, enough for speaking tonight and for sharing your time and perspectives with us. I know we all can understand how important having these conversations are, so we really, truly do appreciate you showing up and engaging in this space with us. Thank you as well to the Canadian Federation of University Women for supporting this panel, and to our community engaged learning team for all of the effort that went into making this happen. And of course, thank you to everyone who joined and participated, even through the chat bot. Have a great rest of your night, and thank you all again for coming. And just a side note, Linda, if you just wanted to stop recording as well.